Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Choose Hope podcast. And today we are with Jodi Smith again, talking about nutrition, how it relates to cancer. In our last episode, we talked about vegetables and we talked about grains, starting the foundation of a healthy diet.
Yeah.
So we're going to continue that now in this episode. So, Jodi, take us through kind of the rest of the pillars for a healthy diet.
Okay, I sure will. And I know we talked a lot about vegetables and whole grains, but they're really paramount. They're really important. And remember, we make changes one change at a time, so you don't have to change everything at once. But let's move into some of the other foundational principles. And fruit is another one. And
Okay.
I could do and hope to do maybe in the future some more things about sugar. But let's suffice it to say that sugar has no nutritional value. And we're talking about white sugar,
Okay.
sugar you would put on something. Zero.
Okay.
No nutritional value. There's no vitamins, there's no minerals. It's empty calories.
Okay.
And we don't need empty calories. Okay. But fruit, on the other hand, has sugar content. And it is true. Your body can't tell the difference between white sugar and sugar in fruit. But think of the package of fruit. So you have an apple. And inside that apple is a lot of sugar, but there's a ton of fiber, and that pectin fiber. Remember how we talked about the soluble and the insoluble fiber, the broom and the sponge? This has that sponge fiber, and it sops up and absorbs. So even though you taste the wonderful sweet of the apple, apples are really, they're like candy if you don't have candy.
Right.
You know what I mean? They taste really good. And that fiber sops up that sugar so it doesn't hit your body and cause a huge problem, with spiking blood sugar.
Okay.
And I always tell people, if you'll eat your fruit at the end of the meal like dessert, that is your dessert. Nothing better than a piece of watermelon. I have been really enjoying watermelon.
Yeah, especially in summertime.
So good. It's just having those couple bites of watermelon satisfies that sweet tooth.
Yeah.
You don't say, oh, I want a cookie, I want a piece of cake or whatever. But fruit can be, again, a great source of those antioxidants that save our body one cell at a time. Remember, oxidative damage breaks your body down one cell at a time. And then also the anti-inflammatories, because think of all the colors of fruit. Every fruit has different antioxidants and different anti-inflammatories. In fact, in pineapple, we found an anti-inflammatory that can help with arthritis and joint pain. And now they do package that. Papaya has an enzyme that they use for helping digestion. There's just so many things. Everything is found in nature if you look far enough. So I tell people 2 to 3 servings of fruit a day. Okay. It depends on you individually, because fruits also have a lot of carbs. Carbohydrates, and we haven't done kind of nutrition 101, but I think most people are pretty familiar. The carbohydrates are, again, that longer burn, that sustainable calorie. We have proteins, we have carbohydrates, and we have fats. And then we have fiber too, but we've been talking a little bit about fiber. By the way, 25 grams of fiber a day is what you need to go for. You need to try to get 25 grams. That's one thing you can say sort of across the board. Maybe not with a little kid, but for adult fiber intake or a teenage to adult fiber intake. But when it comes to protein and carbohydrates, that's very individualized based on the person. We're going to get to protein here shortly.
Height and weight and all
height, weight, and especially your activity level. My husband, who farms and who's super active, is going to need a lot more of most nutrients than I am if I'm more sedentary and I'm not doing all that hard work. So that's why things have changed radically in our society, because we don't, have as much activity. And that's, again, a huge factor with cancer. And the more active you are, the more that helps to protect you against cancer. So, but let's go back to this whole fruit thing. 2 to 3 servings. A serving is a cup or a piece. If you have a little plum or apricot, you can have a couple of those.
Or some blueberries would be
blueberries, exactly. And there are higher carb fruits and lower carb fruits. And we can, berries. I always tell people you just can't go wrong on berries. I'm teaching a class tonight, and one of my recipes is a chocolate berry ice cream. Oh, wow. And it's made with organic cocoa, and it's made with frozen bananas and frozen berries. Just super
simple.
Sounds
very good.
But it's really good. Yeah. You know what I mean? It gives you that couple bites of good nutrition. At the same time, you're getting that super sweet, and you feel like you got your chocolate fix. And I use organic dark chocolate cocoa powder in it. It's really good.
Awesome.
But the thing about fruit is that can be your treat. So have it at the end of the meal. Make sure you've had some protein and some complex carb, in that meal, and that'll make it a lot more beneficial to your body. So that's fruit.
Okay.
2 to 3 servings. Now let's move on to protein. That's a huge area because what we know is that a plant-based diet is better for cancer. We know that. Does that mean you have to be a vegetarian? It doesn't. But it means you need to be aware. And the way that I tell cancer patients to think about meat and protein from an animal is to think of it as a seasoning and not the mainstay. Remember, we want to look at our plate and we want to see half vegetables. So how do you do that? Like with meat. Now, we're farmers. We grow our own meat. We grow it without genetically modified ingredients. We grow it, our cows eat grass, which is what cows were made to eat, not cement or baked goods or junk like that. I mean, honest and truly, that does happen. It's kind of scary. But we don't use antibiotics in our meat. We let them mature as they would normally mature.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that my husband can have a big, juicy steak every day because he has this, cancer risk. And once anybody's ever had cancer, of course, the risk of it coming back is really great. And we've got to always be conscious of that.
Right.
And if you haven't had cancer, you still have a great risk. You know what I mean? So it's keeping especially red meat to a minimum. So what do? I might take that nice, lean, carefully grown steak and get rid of the fat because there's issues with that. We'll talk about that in a little bit, good fats versus bad fats. Take that meat and I would use it in stir fry. Okay, so what have you got? A lot of vegetables, a little bit of meat.
Right.
And the same is true whether it's chicken, salmon, fish, all of that. We need protein. Protein causes our body, almost every cell needs protein. We need muscle. We need protein for our brains to function, our hair to grow, our hormones. Protein is critical. How much, again, is very dependent on who you are. Most people get way too much protein. More than,
really?
And you know what happens if you get too much? Turns to fat.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So we don't need more fat. That's one
Is
thing.
there any kind of a target? I've heard some stuff about like a certain gram amount per pound of body weight.
Exactly.
Like
what I tell people to do is if you Google, you say protein calculator. What it does is it asks you how old you are, how much do you weigh, what's your activity level, and it goes through mild, moderate, and it calculates exactly how many grams of protein you need. So for me to just say generally, we tell pregnant women you need about 100 grams of protein a day. That's kind of generic. But I tell my cancer patients generally, it depends on if they're in treatment or not in treatment, because when you're in treatment, you're going to need more because your body's healing. It's going through a lot of, changes during that time. But in survivorship, I tell people if you can get between 30 and 50 grams of protein a day, you're probably going to be fine. Now that's, again, very generic because everybody's an individual and we try to look at people individually, but those protein calculators are pretty good. You can find them. There's multiple ones. When I teach nutrition to kids, one of the things I do is have them, go on and look, because it'll take into consideration their age, because maybe they're much more active or they're playing, baseball or football or whatever it might be. So protein is individualized, but the quality and the kind of protein is critical. So remember, you don't just have to have protein from meat. We mentioned quinoa as a whole grain. It's the only grain that's a complete protein. But if you take beans and grains, you take vegetables and grains, you take nuts and grains, nuts and beans, all of those combos make a complete protein as well. So
that's what I was thinking. You don't really realize, but if you're eating that type of way and add all that stuff up, you're getting a lot of extracurricular protein from other places that you wouldn't really think about.
Nuts and seeds, almond butter, things like that will provide as well. And we're going to get into how important those kinds of things are. But the big key is we need some protein with each meal. When people are going through treatment, maybe they're going to do some protein shakes. They're doing a lot of that. In fact, I know a lot of people that have gone in for surgeries and they have to drink these boost type protein
Right.
shakes before they can have their surgery, because what's happened is they know that the surgery will be more effective. They'll have less time healing if their protein levels are good when they go into surgery. That's something a lot of hospitals are doing. Unfortunately, I don't think they're using the best quality, and maybe
those
some
don't seem like they would be something that aligns with a lot of the other stuff we're talking about.
Exactly. A lot of it's whey protein too. And, I'm a little bit concerned. Dairy is the number one most common allergen, or something that people do not tolerate well. And we think, oh, dairy, it's so important. You need it every day. Well, a lot of people don't need it at all. And they are actually really sensitive to it. I always tell the story about my husband. He grew up on a dairy farm. And when he met me and I started saying, hey, I think the reason you're clearing your throat all the time, and that gas that you've got, and you had ear infections your whole life, and you had tonsillitis, got your tonsils out, that's because you're sensitive to dairy. I'm not sensitive to dairy. I drink a gallon a day, and again, he grew up on a dairy farm, right? And he milked those cows. But when I had him get rid of it, I said 21 days, no dairy, 21 days. And then he like slammed, it's 22nd day, I'm going to prove you wrong. And that was the whole goal. And it was okay. If he could prove me wrong, I'd be really open to that. But blonde-haired, blue-eyed, most commonly sensitive. He was blonde-haired, blue-eyed.
I didn't know that. Okay.
And so he drinks this glass of milk and has this chunk of cheese. Okay. And all of a sudden he is like racing for the bathroom. His stomach hurts like crazy. Didn't hurt before. Right. He didn't see any of those symptoms before.
That's a good way to test it out, though.
It is. 21 days without, then have a big, a load.
Right.
Now, does that mean he never, ever, ever has dairy? It doesn't. But we're careful. And my kids, because I'm sensitive to dairy, he's sensitive to dairy, our kids are going to be sensitive to dairy. I mean, it's a genetic thing. Okay. You either can digest it well or not. It's having the enzymes to break it down. My kids have a word, and they would come home from, like, say, camp, church camp, or a mission trip or something, and they'd say, I'm dairy-fied. And that meant I got to get off dairy. I've had way too much dairy, I can tell. Yeah. My kids are grown now. They still notice that. It's so funny because one of my sons oversees organic dairy farms, about 185 of them. He's the one that's most sensitive to dairy. But they do grow it right. And, if they're going to do dairy, they're going to do it right. And I sometimes still use a little bit of cheese or things like that in my cooking because it's a source of protein, right? Right. But for most people, when they're going through treatment, if they're doing whey proteins and milk-based protein shakes, it's going to produce a lot of mucus. And what do we, mucus is a wonderful growing ground for all kinds of bacteria. Okay. That's why when you blow your nose, your body uses mucus to get crud out of your body. That makes sense. Yeah. So we don't want to go with that kind of protein. We want to try to go with the best quality protein we can. Now, when I teach classes, I teach vegetarian cooking because we all kind of know how to do meat. You know what I mean? Chicken. Yeah. But whatever meat you're buying, whatever fish you're buying, there are two rules. Meat, no antibiotics. Do you know why they give animals antibiotics? Not to make them healthy.
They're sick, probably.
No. Okay. To make them fat quicker. Okay. They get to weight quicker. It puts weight on. Well, think about that for a second. If it's making the cows fat and the chickens fat, what's it doing to us? Why do we have a huge obesity problem? What's part of the big reason for this terrible obesity problem in our world? I mean, obviously it's eating wrong too, but these antibiotics in these animals are an issue. They give them to them every day of their life. Really? Yeah. So making good choices where it says, and you can find this is something I've worked for my whole life, but in the store now, you'll see the label, no antibiotics ever. That's what you buy. Now, it may not be perfect. It may not be, cows raised on grass or, but it's going to be much better. Fish, wild caught. Okay. Yeah, no farm raised. What do they do with the fish? They put all the crud in those cesspools.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
Sounds
so you pretty gross.
It's pretty gross. Wild caught fish, and at least at the minimum, if it's organic, it's always antibiotic free. That's one of the rules of organic. Okay. If it is antibiotic free, it's not necessarily organic. but that's anything from an animal. That's eggs. Eggs are a perfect source of protein. There's nothing wrong with eggs, though many people are sensitive to them. It's in the big five as far as allergens.
Okay.
But part of that is also how they're raised. I have chickens. I can tell you how they hunt, they peck, they eat things like ticks. They eat things like bugs. That's what chickens are made to do. If they're kept on a floor and they can't even turn around and they, are just
cage or whatever.
Exactly. They're just laying eggs.
Yeah.
You're not going to get the best quality.
Okay.
And you can see the difference.
For sure.
When you crack them, you got dark, orangey yolks and you got, whites that hold together. But if you get the funky eggs, they don't look like that. They're milky yellow and the whites run all over, and just a huge difference in doing things the right way, the way God intended, and then doing things a way to sell more. And I'm not saying that you can't ever eat that kind of thing, but you can make better choices in the meat proteins that you choose. And then you can learn how to do vegetarian proteins. And if you do need to to add like protein shakes, there's great vegetarian protein sources made with brown rice, with pea protein, hemp protein, chia seeds. There's a lot of other sources of protein that are higher quality than using like whey or collagen or things from an animal. Okay. So you've got choices there. And I do protein shakes for, some of my patients and people I work with, because they're in that place where they just can't eat very well. And we do smoothies and protein shakes where we blend some things so that they can get it into their body. But you need protein. You need good, high quality protein. And if we have time, I'm going to jump into fats.
Okay.
Because we have good fats and bad fats. And we need to do a whole podcast on fats, because that's where there's some of the most erroneous information out there and crazy stuff. But this is what we know. We don't need more than 30% of our total calories coming from fat. Now, everybody gets a different calorie amount. Mm-hmm. I need less calories than you need, Jesse.
Just like the protein.
Just like the protein. Right. But no matter how much you get, you need less than 30% of all of those calories coming from fat. Now you need to break that fat down into good fats versus bad fats.
Okay.
So I am old enough to have lived through margarine. Most, your age group, margarine's pretty much passé now. Mm-hmm. But we decided we could take, and if we did this scientific process where we turned liquid fat into semi-solid fat, we could sell that. And my mom talks, I didn't live during this day, but my mom talks about how they used to have little packets where they change the color so it wasn't white. It would make it look like butter. They would put yellow food coloring in it to make it look yellow in her day, and they would mix that around. Okay. We have saturated fat, it's hard at room temperature, and unsaturated fat, which is liquid at room temperature, or at least mostly liquid. Okay. Then we break it down further into those fats that benefit our body and those fats that can cause problems. So omega-3 fatty acids, I like to focus on the good stuff and not talk as much about the bad stuff. But omega-3 would include olive oil, avocado oil, some of the nut oils. But for basic purposes, when I'm teaching classes, I teach people olive for cold, avocado for hot. Okay, that means if you're stir frying, if you're roasting vegetables, if you're doing the grill, use avocado oil. It can take high temp oil. It can take high heat. It does a very high smoke point. Olive oil, on the other hand, which is a very good oil, if you get good quality, I like to get that good extra virgin organic olive oil, because it's become so popular. They cheat a lot. They add other oils. Many people have seen the articles about that. But good quality olive oil is wonderful for omega-3s. And again, it goes back to the beginning of time. Olives have been, a source. Yeah. I love in scripture that oil is synonymous with money. If you had oil, you were rich. But they used it very sparingly. It was, very important. So I always try to tell people, if oil costs more money, like avocado oil is pricey, olive oil is pricey, what do? You use less. You're careful with it. But we found a way to make oil by pressing things like safflower, sunflower, soybean, corn, and we heat it really, really high heat, and we can press a lot of oil out, and we can have vats that we can deep fat fry things in. You can do that with avocado or olive oil because it costs you a fortune.
Well, and even I have not done that, but I thought about it, and I couldn't believe how much the peanut oil cost.
Oh my goodness! Exactly.
It's a whole nother sideways thing.
Exactly. And sesame oil and all of those. But we found this way to do it. But guess what? Once they pressed that oil. One is, have you ever smelled burned oil? Stinks.
Right.
Really stinks bad. So they have to add deodorizers to get the stink out.
That doesn't sound very
and
good.
It's dark colored. Are you going to cook your French fries in black oil?
Right.
They have to bleach it to be able to get it back to normal.
I think that's been a hot topic lately, is the seed oil stuff. So I was going to ask you about that. I mean, I don't know.
I would love to just talk specifically, and I can even bring in some, examples and all of that. But for a long time, and I remember back 30 years ago, having a study that said that seed oils, especially omega-6s, safflower, sunflower, all of that, those that were considered at that time to be the good ones, not necessarily corn or soybean that they were making, in commercial grades, but safflower oil, sunflower oil, all these seed oils were the good stuff. And I remember reading an article about how one researcher was using those seed oils to provoke breast tumors.
Really?
And then all of a sudden, all of the margarines, the ones that were not made from butter, were all made with what? Safflower, sunflower, all of that. All those became the norm. Nobody ate butter. Heaven forbid you eat butter. You had to eat all this margarine-y stuff. Now, what we know about butter is that it's saturated fat, and we need less. Okay. We don't need none. We can get by with some, but we need less. What I encourage people to do is take that butter, and I say organic butter, no antibiotics, because what happens in a cow is just like what happens in a human mama. If you have chemicals, it ends up the most in milk. That's why moms have to be really careful when they're breastfeeding, that they're not giving their, kids, their babies, chemicals that they're taking. Okay. So get organic butter, and then I take 1 pound of organic butter and 2 cups of good quality oil, blend it together. I put it in my KitchenAid and whip it till it's light and fluffy, and it spreads right from the fridge. That way you've got the balance between unsaturated and saturated. You've got the good quality omega-3s in there. And I tell my husband it's so you can eat less because you can spread it. He thinks it's so you can eat more because it's better butter, right? It tastes just like butter, which nothing tastes better than butter. I mean, butter is the best. But you get that balance there. And then, of course, you don't use too much. And then when I'm cooking and when I'm using only avocado and olive, I say, get the rest out of there. Okay. And when you're out, the biggest problem, if you're eating wonderful salad, but it's got crummy salad dressing. Every salad dressing I looked at, even the ones that said olive oil, had soybean oil. Okay. And we live in Indiana. We know what we do to soybeans. We see it every day, We know that the chemicals and so on that they put on there. So we want to try to get as clean as we can with oils, best quality we can get. And then again, use a MyFitnessPal or an Apple Foods, or there's all kinds of free free programs you can use, and you enter in all your foods you eat, and then it tells you exactly what you're getting. What percentage of fat, what percentage of carbohydrates, how many grams. It gives you a lot of information that you can utilize. But that's the basic foundation of food, okay? What do we need? We haven't talked about water. We'll do that on a different one, or what you drink. But if you can get 7 servings of vegetables a day, you can make sure that you have 2 to 3 at least servings of whole grains a day, a couple of servings, 2 to 3 of fruit. You can get some good fats, and you get high quality protein. You have the foundation for your body to be able to heal itself and to help with whatever treatment you're doing to keep strong through whatever treatment you're doing.
Well, and I think there's probably 2 different types of people, maybe a few more than that, but one category that's going to be interested in tracking all this stuff and using the MyFitnessPal and whatever, and that's great if you're into that. But if you're overwhelmed by all that, especially the fact that you might have cancer, just following kind of those steps you just put out. I mean,
Basic
that's
foundations.
pretty simple.
Yeah.
Might be a little intimidating at first, but you write
We
that
can break
stuff
it down.
down
It's
and
simple.
yeah. And then like you had said, I think in our first podcast, you're not going to overeat on these really healthy vegetables and that kind of stuff. So like you can more just, hey, this is all the stuff I can have and kind of the ratio.
Yep.
And then you don't have to track every individual half teaspoon of this or whatever.
You don't have to track it at all. And then there's all kinds of options. People say, what about mayonnaise? Can I use mayonnaise? Oh, they got this great avocado mayonnaise that they sell at Costco. It's made with avocado oil.
We've used
it just
that
came
as well.
up. It's wonderful.
It's pretty good. Yeah.
And you could make a sandwich. Can you do a sandwich? Well, of course you can use some really great whole grain bread. There's an option for everything. And so what I try to say to people is go with what you like, what your normal way. You don't have to change everything at once,
right?
But maybe you can make a wonderful substitution, and that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, awesome. Well, everybody, thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed it and found some of this helpful. Stay tuned as we continue to do more and just try to provide more information that's helpful to anybody dealing with cancer or just trying to maybe live a more healthy lifestyle.
Yeah.
And thank you, Jodi, for your time and joining us again. We really
Thanks so much.
We'll see you next time.